Okay, so now we're live.
So folks can join us now, hopefully, and then we can start in a few more minutes.
And so as people are coming in, and we will mute ourselves as others start speaking. Well, I'm going to start now. Good morning, and welcome to a Brooklyn Waterfront Research Center breakfast talk. I'm glad that all of you have made it, and this is our second virtual breakfast talk. I hope you enjoy the virtual donuts and virtual coffee, and we apologize, and we hope that one of these days we will be back on the campus of City Tech, where we can, in fact, welcome you and provide you with something more substantial than virtual coffee. Today, we are privileged to have with us a collection of artists who have exhibited their work, or are currently exhibiting their work at the Old Stone House in Brooklyn, and we will be hearing more about that. This work has been curated by Catherine Gressel, who has curated Brooklyn Utopias for a number of years. And I am going to introduce her now. And first, I want to thank everyone for coming and to thank the artists for participating in this morning's talk. So without further ado, I'd like to present Catherine Gressel.
Thank you so much, Richard, and everyone for having me here and for showcasing Brooklyn Utopias. And thank you to all the wonderful artists, including the ones who aren't here today. And I also want to give a huge thank you to Kim Mayer, the director of the Old Stone House, for giving me the opportunity to curate with the space for the past over 10 years that we've worked together, and for giving me the initial space and resources to do my very first Brooklyn Utopia show back in 2009, 2010, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. But before that, I would like to turn it over to Kim, and then I'm going to start sharing some slides. So is Kim ready?
Hi, thanks so much, Catherine. And thank you to Richard and your colleagues at City Tech for inviting us to be part of this morning's program. It's a great opportunity for us to raise awareness about our work here at the Old Stone House and the really exciting contemporary arts programming that we do on site. For those of you that are not familiar, the Old Stone House is part of the Historic House Trust of New York City, which are 23 historic sites located in parks throughout the 5 boroughs. And we are an independent organization that serves as the conservancy for the park. And our programming focuses on the Lenape, colonial, and Revolutionary War eras. And we have a strong connection to the landscape. And the contemporary art program is a way to create a really relevant conversation about not only the contemporary interpretation of the historic themes of our site, but also to really connect to the land, which was taken from the Lenape in the 17th century, and to try and create an open and welcoming space that looks at the diverse population of Brooklyn and how all of these cultures come together in our community. So Catherine has done an amazing job as a curator of bringing these voices to the forefront and creating a space for this wonderful conversation around these ideas. So Catherine, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to work with you, and we are always so happy to have a chance to work with artists, not only visual artists, but artists like Lynn Newman, who also dances on the site and brings so much energy to the space.
Thank you. It was a great intro to the house. Kim pretty much already talked about a lot of these goals that we have with our contemporary art program, which we sort of formalized in 2016, even though I, have been curating shows for even longer than that. And I think one of our most important goals, in addition to sort of bringing these, connecting to current social justice, environmental, and urban planning themes to the past, is really supporting kind of nurturing artist projects at critical stages and connecting them to new types of community partnerships and hopefully future opportunities, which is something that I really hope we've been able to do with the artists that are presenting today and the other artists in Brooklyn Utopias 2020. And then here's just a couple images of the space. You can see how unique it is as a place to show art. So I'll talk a little bit about kind of the Brooklyn Utopias project and its history, and then go into our current 2020 exhibition. So the word utopia is usually defined as an ideal place, and another definition of it is sometimes no place, implying that a true utopia may be impossible, but kind of an ideal to strive towards. And the idea to first do a show about Brooklyn as utopia in 2008, when I first got the idea, was really inspired by my own observations of how much Brooklyn had changed since my childhood growing up in New York City in the 80s and 90s. All of a sudden, Brooklyn was becoming this really trendy place that was attracting artists and developers and young people. And I started, a lot of the projects like Atlantic Yards and some of the high rises were just kind of under development at that point. And I started making art about these developments that I saw in my neighborhood of Prospect Heights at the time. And I realized there were a lot of other artists around me kind of addressing similar issues, looking at Brooklyn. So I had the idea of bringing us all together in a show. And I was really lucky to get connected to Kim and the house, and she offered the space for the very first Brooklyn Utopias exhibits that took place in 09 and 10. And I was also lucky to have the opportunity to present it at the Brooklyn Historical Society at the same time. So we had those initial shows about sort of Brooklyn as utopia in general, and then that led to a lot of future Brooklyn Utopias exhibits at the Old Stone House that addressed such issues as parks and public spaces, transportation, and health and wellness over the years. And in all of these shows, I've invited artists to either critique or reflect on existing visions of Brooklyn and urban utopias, such as those of developers, politicians, environmentalists, as well as really envision their own. And in all of these shows, I've aimed to promote the work of artists who are kind of working in sustained ways with communities or environmental issues, and really doing hands-on work to affect real change, but also really recognizing the importance of artists that are more like critics or visionaries that are helping us imagine the world into being, in the words of art historian Carol Becker. So when I planned the 2020 show, when we were kind of going over our exhibition calendar for this year, we thought it would be really interesting to sort of revisit the original theme of like a Brooklyn utopia in general, especially during an election year and a time of reflection over the past decade. And also many of the developments addressed in my original show were sort of coming into, really coming into fruition over the past 10 years, as well as issues like gentrification and climate change really becoming intensified and more present in the public mind over the past 10 years. So we did a targeted open call process for the show in January and invited some of the past artists to revisit their original projects. And then, of course, as we were getting ready to select the final group of artists in March, the pandemic hit and, hit Brooklyn especially hard. And, over the past 6 months, there's been so much going on with Black Lives Matter protests, new environmental crises, And so although the work in the show wasn't maybe originally conceived with all these things in mind, I think that the show as a whole really responds to this current moment by suggesting that a Brooklyn utopia involves not only a safe, healthy environment that allows for the preservation of Brooklyn's historic landmarks and diverse communities, but a Brooklyn utopia really requires seeking collective action and community collaboration as opposed to toxic levels of independence, to quote one of the artists, Jody Wood's project. And so many of the artists that were selected for this show both kind of propose and put into practice innovative ways to connect with one another and with communities and take action even during this time of social distancing. And many of the artists were able to adapt their projects to have robust online and outdoor components that people could experience in a lot of different ways during this time. And we're also just so lucky that we were able to put together a physical exhibition in our space and have some outdoor public programs and have it available for people to actually see in person. Because for a while we weren't even sure we'd be able to do that, but we do have, so we encourage you to make an appointment to see the show in person through October 18th on our website. And you can also visit our very extensive online exhibition at this URL here, which we can share in the chat, and I'll put it back on the last slide. And there's a lot of ways to participate on social media if you follow us at Old Stone House BKLYN, and you can even upload your own images of Brooklyn Utopias and tag them with this hashtag here. So hopefully all of you can participate. We have a couple of events coming up next week as well, which I'll talk about. These are just a couple of the images of the installation itself. You can kind of see how our space really provides a lot of interesting nooks and crannies to show the art and respond to our architecture. This is our stairwell where we also show some of the work. And now I'll just talk a little bit about some of the overall themes in the show and the artists, and then I'll really turn it over to the artists who are here today. So we have a couple of artists who are exploring sort of competing visions between big developers, historic preservationists, community groups about really what's best for certain areas of the borough. And a lot of these projects do touch upon Brooklyn's waterfront, I think are very relevant to this group. These artists, Nathan Kensinger and Nate Dorr, who I think have presented at previous breakfast talks, they put together a video and sort of photo slideshow documenting the Admiral's Row historic houses in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which were bulldozed in 2016 to make way for this Wegmans grocery store and parking lot. And they actually projected images of the original site on the grocery store on opening night, which you can see on the left. And to me, this really represents sort of the artist trying to kind of mourn what was lost in terms of of green space and history in favor of what a lot of people thought would be a utopian kind of development and a food desert and maybe creating jobs, but that the artists also would argue that it's a little bit of an out of touch development during a time when people order groceries online and not everyone has cars to get there. Here's some more images of that. And we have these paintings by Amir Hariri that show the development along Williamsburg and Greenpoint waterfront, such as the redevelopment of the Domino sugar factory and how, some of the controversies around that. And I think these really show how developers can sometimes exploit the historic industrial forms in Brooklyn to add to the appeal of their new developments. These images by David Coots of the Brooklyn Grange, the biggest rooftop farm in Brooklyn, show sort of a more harmonious relationship between industry and nature in Brooklyn, suggesting a sort of a utopia where these can peacefully exist. And then in terms of environmental projects in our show, we have some artists like Jan Moon that have really been doing real bioremediation work over many years. Her Fairy Rings project in the Newtown Creek oil spill site has been going on for a long time in collaboration with ExxonMobil and community groups to use this type of fungus, mycelium, that can break down complex chains of toxic chemicals in the soil. And I think this is a great sort of project that blurs the lines between environmentalism and science and art, because it's very sculptural and it takes its inspiration from the fairy rings in European folklore, but it also has like a real impact on the environment. We have this like cool little fish tank on the upper right installed at Old Stone House that shows the mushrooms growing in the soil. And then we're going to hear in a few minutes from Robin and Lynn, but this is their project on plastic use and recycling in Brooklyn. And we're happy that we could install some of these projects that promote environmental awareness and activism in highly public sites around our house. You can see the OSH in the background, and then this fence is overlooking a really busy thoroughfare on 4th Avenue in Park Slope, where these posters are getting a lot of notice. This is also our fence around our field, where we have human impact stories by the Human Impact Institute that show local female climate leaders in New York City, and each one has sort of reminders of how different things that we can do to fight climate change. And then we'll hear from Annalisa Jensen in a few minutes too about her project that really promotes activism around a bike lane on the Verrazano Bridge, also installed in a very highly trafficked setting in front of our house on 5th Avenue. We also have some artists that are really looking at gentrification, especially in Brooklyn's historically Black and immigrant neighborhoods, and really through the lens of storytelling and telling their personal family stories, as well as giving voice to people in the community to tell their stories, and really promoting empathy around the people impacted by gentrification. Betty Yu is going to talk about her work in a minute in Sunset Park. But I also encourage you guys to go to our website and watch the trailer for Asha Boston's A Time Before Kale. Asha will also be doing a screening on Zoom with us Wednesday the 14th, where she'll talk about this project that kind of looks at the history of some of these neighborhoods like Bed-Stuy and Crown Heights, and how the culture and the groups that have been there for a long time have really contributed to the appeal of Brooklyn in these neighborhoods, but now are at risk of being forced out. And then we have artists like Rochelle Schickoff, who have documented some of the other communities that we really want to preserve in Brooklyn, like the Muslim community in Bay Ridge and their traditions. And we also have a set of projects in the show that really focus on the individuals that make up Brooklyn and the support structures needed to ensure that Brooklyn can be a utopia for everyone, and not just those who can afford to live here or afford to not get sick during the pandemic. This project by Alon Cadiz uses scaffolding as a visual metaphor for the kind of support and care needed in a society that really takes care of and values every individual. We have a series of these portraits on view in the show that focus on individuals based in Brooklyn that have really impacted her life in some way, like local artists and performers and historians. And she has like, I think almost 100 of these portraits of different people. So you can definitely check that out on her Instagram. I also encourage you guys to go online and read the full essay by Diane Xavier, which the text is displayed in our space, called Florence Delva, which explores how police violence and inequities in public health are impacting East Flatbush, where she's based out of. And then you can all definitely take this quiz by Jody Wood to see if you have toxic levels of independence. Oops. And if you do, you can schedule a Zoom session with her, and she'll sort of teach you how to be more dependent. And to me, this project really embodies a lot of the central themes of the show. To quote Jody Wood, "As Brooklyn becomes more unaffordable, it is an especially difficult place to find oneself in a situation of dependency. It risks becoming a place where only young, able-bodied, economically self-sufficient people can access quality of life. The ITC envisions a future for Brooklyn where our universal vulnerability and dependence is normalized and accepted in the social realm." So this is a really kind of interesting reflection on Brooklyn as a whole. And then I'll just end with a couple of our large-scale public art projects that I would also encourage everyone to see. This installation of scrolling text on our 4th Avenue facade by Tamara Gayer. She's collected quotes from the community, as well as her own musings on what makes us feel safe and unsafe as a community amid the dual pandemics of COVID and racism. in our garden, we have this beautiful installation by Aviva Olenek where she planted cotton and indigo, and her embroidery sort of acknowledges the contributions of enslaved people to Brooklyn's agricultural past, and reminds us that we still have a way to go before we can really be a utopia for everyone. But I'd like to now turn it over to some of our artists and just remind you all to visit our online exhibition. There are even more artists that I didn't have time to talk about that you can look at, and visit our social media. And now I'm really excited to turn it over to Robin and Lynn.
I just unmuted you, Robin.
Oh, sorry. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. Robin's going to be, there we go. So Robin and I met in the summer of 2018. We were both artists in residence at Governor's Island. I was working on an installation using plastic bags and a piece about performance piece about plastic pollution. And she was photographing the residents at the Underwater New York and Works on Water residency, of which we were both a part. And so she came into my studio one day to do some photographing, and I just grabbed a bunch of stuff that I had ironed together, and we went outside and got this image. And that was the beginning of a collaboration, which we now call Wayside Story. Do you want to say anything, Robin?
This day when I photographed you, I was so struck both by your energy and the fantastic costumes. And once I saw this, though, I thought, okay, this is really good, but we can make it great by taking it on location.
So I'll just talk a little bit about my background. I'm a choreographer historically, and I run an organization based here in Brooklyn called Artichoke Dance Company. I began working with plastic. I've been working around plastic pollution for about 12 years, and I'll drop in the chat if you want to learn a little bit more about the history of that. You can go watch this short 5-minute video where I talk about it. But I began working with plastic bags in 2017 when the plastic bag legislation failed in New York City. So in 2017, the city council passed plastic bag legislation, which was then thwarted at the state level. Basically, there was a law that was passed saying we can't, as a municipality of 1 million more people, we don't have the right in New York State to pass that type of legislation. And so I started, I decided, I had been making this a practice in my artistic work of making costumes and sets out of upcycled plastic items. So I decided to focus on bags. And let's go to the next slide. So we, wherever we were performing, all of our costumes were made out of plastic bags, and concurrently we would gather signatures for petitions. I was working with the New York State Plastic Bag Coalition. We would gather signatures from audiences, and then ended up delivering them in Albany. And as we all know now, we have passed plastic bag legislation, which has been tricky going into effect around COVID, but let's go to the next slide. Part of my strategy is to get people involved with the materials themselves. So I lead what I call trash-in workshops, making fashion from trash. And this was from a multi-generational project with a community in upstate New York. That part of the advocacy and the learning is getting people out and talking about them. So the projects are you gather your plastic bags, which gets you interacting with people in the community. And then we work on making outfits together. So we're learning about the chemical properties of plastics and the hazards of them in the environment. And then we do some kind of public showing. So this is at a sculpture park in upstate New York, where we did a performance on the grounds with all of these people. Let's go to the next slide. And then I saw Brad Vogel was on. Hi, Brad. This is this is along the Gowanus Canal project that we did summer of 2019 called Gowanus Visions. And this was a performance with some Murrow High School students and other people from the community and Artichoke Dance Company that was on the promenade at Sponge Park. So that's a little bit of background, and I'll turn it over to Robin to kind of talk about her background, and then we'll talk about the intersection of our work.
My work on the Brooklyn waterfront got me thinking about sea level rise in about 2010, and by 2017, that concern had taken me to Louisiana. In Louisiana, while exploring the River Road from Baton Rouge to New Orleans, I discovered Norco, which is a town that lives with a shell refinery. I thought that the images that I took there were good metaphors for climate change, or as people have been saying in the chat, the climate crisis. The problem is clearly visible, yet we choose to ignore it. We choose to live with it. So I started to search out communities, this is Linden, New Jersey, that were living with petroleum production. And my interest wasn't to report on local conditions, though they were often appalling. It was instead to create metaphors about how we all live. This church is in a small neighborhood in Shippingport, PA, which is outside of Pittsburgh. It's situated between a nuclear and a coal plant. We see the coal plant here. And I love this image because I could imagine somebody sitting on this bench, completely oblivious to the coal cooling towers rising behind them. And this is a photograph of the TPC group petrochemical plant in Port Neches, Texas. Butadiene was made at this plant until it blew up in November of 2019. And this was just weeks after the Trump administration rolled back Obama-era chemical safety regulations. So this series in general is just a loud scream. And I really welcomed the opportunity to work with Lynn on this project, to take her energy and her costumes on location. Here we are in East Chicago, Indiana at the BP Whiting refinery. You see behind her the coker that was, I believe it was finished in the last 5 years. It allows this plant to refine Canadian tar sands. Lynn?
So yeah, with this project, I mean, we kind of married our two ideas. Before I started working with Robin, I was really looking at plastic pollution as pollution in the environment and the chemical toxicity that escapes into the environment. And what we're trying to do with this project is to create a narrative that follows single-use plastic waste from cradle to grave, and really weaving in the piece that's often not talked about of how plastics adds to our fossil fuel dependence because they're made out of fossil fuels. So the whole of the project is looking at, okay, we're taking fossil fuels to make this thing that has, you know, a effective life of about 15 minutes, which is the life that a plastic bag actually has, the utility of it. And all of the infrastructure and natural resources that go into this quote unquote convenience that we have. So here we are again in Whiting. Robin and I had the fortunate opportunity to actually do this shoot a couple of months ago and get close to these. It's been one of our goals to try and get close to a fossil fuel refinery, and we had the opportunity to do this shoot here. So as you can see, there's the refinery is in the background. There's things spewing into the air. And it's my dream, although I don't know that we'll ever be able to get there without getting arrested, is to actually shoot on a pipeline. So should we go to the next slide? So this is in Linden, New Jersey, and this is in front of the Phillips 66 refinery. Do you want to talk a little bit more about this, Robin?
Yeah, so the Bayway plant is a petrochemical complex. They refine petroleum, but they also make polypropylene. And think about your medical mask, right? That's what it's made out of. I loved this image because I felt that the refinery looked a little bit like the Emerald City from The Wizard of Oz, and is just as illusory as hiding its tremendous impact on all of us. And this is in Tremley, which is a neighborhood of Linden, New Jersey, and you can see one of the tank farms. So there's just a tremendous amount of infrastructure that goes into producing what appear to be cheap plastic bags.
So part of the infrastructure and the resources that goes into waste, right? So we're lucky to have a great recycling stream here in Brooklyn. Although nationally, about 8 to 12%, depending upon where you are, of single-use plastics gets recycled. So that means that the rest of that, 88 to 92%, is either getting put in a landfill and or escaping into the environment. So that's a lot of trucking and a lot of fossil fuels to just kind of cart that stuff around. So this was a shoot that we did on the back of a sanitation truck.
Yeah, and this is actually a dual bin loader, and it would be used to collect recyclables. And just to relate to the Brooklyn waterfront, this is a Department of Sanitation parking lot in Sunset Park, and you know, so much of the Brooklyn waterfront was used for parking for so long. And here's another vehicle in the sanitation department fleet, also parked in Sunset Park.
I need to see something like this, like moving the trash around in a landfill or at a recycling facility. So again, more fossil fuels going into just move stuff around that, you know, maybe we don't really actually need. Not maybe we do. So this is at the Sims recycling facility. We had the great opportunity to shoot on the tipping floor. And as you can see, there's a mound of plastic, a lot of bags kind of stuck in there at the recycling facility. Thank you to Richard, who organized this talk to help facilitate getting us there.
And also just to point out that Brooklyn recycles only about 18% of recyclable materials. So imagine this is what's come in one day, but you know, multiply that by 5 to think about how much waste we're creating with this profligate use of plastic.
I did put the website in the chat if you want to go and check it out. It talks a little bit more about each of the locations. From here, we're going, so this is like kind of the narrative of our shoot thus far. One of the first images I saw, or that we showed, was of me in a plastic bag costume in a river. That was shot at a residency in Wyoming, but Robin and our next shoot will probably be oceanside because plastic pollution in the ocean and the marine environment is a huge problem, and so that's the next part of the narrative that we'll be weaving in. So follow along. There's more to come. And I think we'll turn it over to the next folks.
Hi, this is Annalisa here, and I'm trying to share my screen. It says who can share, only host. So do you have to get out of your screen sharing, Robin and Lynn?
I turned mine off. I'm no longer sharing the screen.
All right, so let me just see. Here we go.
Catherine, perhaps you can introduce Annalise before she speaks.
Sure, yeah. So we're really excited to have been working with Annalisa on this project that really speaks to Old Stone House's history as a site that was developed by Robert Moses in the 30s. And she's kind of resurrecting Moses's sort of rival Jane Jacobs, if you will, through this project, as well as really advocating for some direct action around bike access in the 5 boroughs. So I will let her explain her project more.
Thank you, Catherine. Yes, I decided to look into the history of the old stone house and then link it to the present. And Robert Moses has a history with the old stone house in terms of both the house and the grounds. So I thought that it would be appropriate that Jane Jacobs came to live there and then resurrect a fight with him. And in this particular case, it's I wanted it to be about the bridge, because I see that getting a bike and pedestrian lane on that's something we can do locally to address our climate crisis. It's overwhelming what's going on. And if we can pick these battles that are local, where you can actually see some results, this would not be a difficult thing to do. So I have the 3 banners that are on the fences that are going around the house, and then I have 88 flyers, and then I picked quotes by Jane Jacobs along with my photos down here in Bay Ridge by the Narrows and the bridge. And so the one that is about bringing together people with communities of interest, I think that is very pertinent to what I'm doing, because I have to go across the bridge. So I'm working both on Staten Island as well as in Southwest Brooklyn for this, and now up in Park Slope through the project. And also I meant to say thank you to everybody who came today, and thank you for a great team at Old Stone House. So this was the very first person to sign my petition. The petition is a crucial part of it. And this was when I was hanging the banners with my friend Janine that day. They were barely up before somebody came up and started asking questions. And then I showed them how to scan the QR code. And then here are all that was the first flyer that I made. And so basically all people have to do is scan the QR code, and that'll take you straight to the petition. And let me see here, this is what it looks like inside in the old stone house, that unfortunately it's difficult for people to visit. But here is Jane checking out the bridge that was sort of not exactly how it should be, because Robert Moses was the one who was responsible for there not being a bike pedestrian lane on it. So a second or an action that I did at the Old Stone House was having a green harbor ride where people could come from anywhere and then go there. And this was my invitation. And if you look in the middle, you'll see this sort of magenta ring. That is basically the Verrazano Bridge. And it looks as if, you know, you can go straight across, but that is obviously only cars as of now. So that's where the whole issue is. And there's another group that's working on this that's called a Harbor Ring. And that's specifically because thinking about how we're all linked. And if we get this access, you'll be able to bike all around New York's harbor and then access all the bridges over to New Jersey from Staten Island as well. And then for that action up at the house, I made a second flyer from Bikes Off Brooklyn, their proposal, and that's a bike activist group that I co-founded here in Bay Ridge. So people could actually see how easy it would be to do this. So it's just using one of the existing 13 lanes on the bridge. And then I was talking to the Transportation Alternatives Chair, Rose, last week with Bikes Off Brooklyn, because they now, 2 weeks ago, they reinitiated their Verrazano campaign, which is great. And she mentioned this word that I love for it. It's like we're repurposing the bridge. It doesn't have to be this ridiculous proposal by the MTA that was millions and millions for all of this. You just use this lane that's there right now. and none of the other bridges have got 13 lanes, so this one can do without it as well. And then I brought, because of the pandemic, it had to be safe, safely wrapped, snacks that people could have. So I couldn't have the whole picnic I thought about initially, but it was a really good day. A bunch of people came, and then they were scanning. You can see Jane Jacobs is here in the bushes on her bike, and there was music going on at the house. I put in the flyer on top of the vitrine. And then also it happened to be the day that there was a big buy jumble. So that meant that I had a readily available and sympathetic audience to the cause. So I was running around getting signatures. And here we have the Steve from the Fireborough Bicycle Club. And then in addition to the flyering up at the old stone house, I do flyering down here on the Narrows. And then I ask people for permission if I can post a photo of them holding up the petition that they're signing on Instagram. And basically that's where you can find me. If you do hashtag Bike the Verrazano, this project will come up and you can send me messages if you're interested. And so here, I have a lot of favorite photos, but I really like how the two creatures, the two dogs that are also out for exercise and the social ride became part of the image. And then this is what's going on in the studio right now. I'm making a series of very large images of the QR code. And if you pull out your phone right now and open it to a camera, and then pretend you're taking a picture, but without taking it, then it'll open straight to the petition. And of course we have Jane. I hand painted a bunch of images of her on her bicycle. And here's another one that you can also scan if you want to. And I'm gonna put I'm gonna put one of these in our chat when we're done. And Jane as a sculpture. And then the next chapter for me with this project will be to do a series of water-based actions of the on behalf of this lane. And the first one took place last Sunday when Janine's ocean swimmer group posed with my flyer and signed and shared and all of that. But then they got in the water to do a swim on behalf of Wide Awake's Navy. And so this is the first group that I asked if they would be interested in doing something on the water for next year. And now I'm actually beginning to think that some of this stuff we can start doing almost right away, because I could make swimming caps with the QR code. I've started contacting people who do all sorts of things on the water, including the Gowanus dredgers that I saw here today, which is great. So we're having a meeting, whether it's going to be in person or Zoom. And so basically my idea would be to put, and Ernest came a little after they were all in the water. So, and then everybody, when they've been in the water, Janine had hot chili in her backyard and all of these things that happened during the swim. But that's a whole other story in terms of meeting people from Wide Awake's Navy. And so this is my final image again. And this is, so if I were to meet you down by the Narrows, I would say, yep, you open your phone. And then not just that where you scan and sign, but when you go to the petition, there's an option that says share. So then you can share it with everybody who's in your network, and you can share it on social media. And at first I thought I'll get a few signatures. Now it's over 700, and I really wanted to get to 10,000 because then it'll land automatically on Cuomo's desk. Basically, in order for this to happen, we have to get the attention of the governor so that he can put pressure on the MTA. because the MTA is more or less has been in this area is an extension of Robert Moses, and they have been dragging their feet for decades. And so it's bypassing the MTA. It's just going straight to the governor. And then a friend of mine is an activist, a lawyer, and he was like, well, 10,000 signatures, then it'll be on his desk. And so that's why I'm thinking, I could see this on sails. I could see this as a sign when people are on the boat, or if Lynn is out in the water, just now watching the river picture with Lynn. It could be, people can participate in a bunch of ways, but I wanted to have the QR code so that people can then scan it and we can get to that number. And thank you again to the QR code came up as a solution through conversations with Kim and Catherine about how to have people sign on the fence. Yeah, thank you to everybody. I feel we're already like a little community from just doing this. And now I'll end my screen share and put this in the chat.
So much. This is great, and definitely everybody signed the petition. And I'm excited to introduce now our third artist, or I guess fourth artist, Betty Yu, who's been doing some amazing work in the Sunset Park community for many years, looking at her own family and as well as gentrification and displacement in that community.
Hi, okay, I'm just gonna start sharing. Thanks again for you all organizing this. It's been really wonderful just learning from you, Catherine, as you were talking about the work of all the artists and obviously from the artists themselves. So this has been really pleasant. Okay, so let me just go and share, sorry. Okay, okay, present, okay. So just wanted to start, I always start from the personal to the political, and just wanted to start with this image, which is also in the show. It's sort of a gold framed picture of me and my grandmother from the 80s, early 80s. Our family was part of the first wave of families, Chinese American families, to move into Sunset Park, Brooklyn, born and raised in Brooklyn. And I really identified with what you were saying, Catherine, about sort of the changes, right? When I went to NYU Film School, I remember in the 90s, it was like, Brooklyn, what? It was like scary, like no one would ever come visit me, right? Because I was commuting from home. But anyway, so this is my resilient, amazing grandmother who actually passed away at 103 years old a couple of years ago. And she always had my back, and she's like the woman warrior to me. And then these are all my multiple identities. As a socially engaged artist, I also teach, and I first identify as a filmmaker, then as a multimedia artist, using art as a way to provoke and activate change, and provoke people, sort of move people, right, to take action. And I'll share links like much later on, or at the end of my presentation rather, so you don't have to write any of this down. And again, I think Kim did it already, just wanted to acknowledge the land that we stand on in general, right? Specifically where I grew up, which is the land of Lenape people. And they're the first people who occupied, who settled on the land. And specifically, I think that it's really important to acknowledge not only the past, but the present and future struggles of Native people, Indigenous people across the country and across the world, really. And specifically, a lot of my work relates to gentrification and displacement, and there's no way that we can have this, this conversation without acknowledging that we stand on occupied Lenape land, and particularly acknowledge people who have been the most dispossessed and the most impacted by gentrification and displacement. So I wanted to start with this quote, and some of you may know who Dr. Mindy Fully Love is. I think she teaches now at New School. She's been jumping around a bit, and she is a huge influence. Her book, Root Shock, which really is about gentrification, basically, and how that has, urban renewal in African-American communities throughout cities, throughout New York City, throughout the country, have really impacted people's livelihoods, not just physical separation, but obviously the psychological impact. And so just wanted to open with this quote, which is very powerful. She says, "The place we call home is inscribed into our bodies. The street we call ours is a setting for a communal longing and belonging. Our neighborhood is the first world we know as a child." So I'm very influenced by her research and just the research of urban planners and people who, speaking of Brooklyn Utopias, who are thinking about sort of not only just the present, but also mapping out what the future could possibly look like. And then I'll just go through these really fast. I'm very much influenced in a negative and positive way by creative placemaking projects, right? And this is something that's been really, really more in the last 10, 15 years, although it can definitely benefit a community. Parts of Brooklyn and parts of New York City that I've seen, and even just traveling around the country, you see that a lot of this creative placemaking is actually really been leveraged by real estate developers to actually eventually kind of displace people who lived in that neighborhood, particularly using public, private, and even sometimes nonprofit funding in the guise of sort of bettering the community, beautifying the community, and arts and culture is often used to displace people, what we call art washing. And then a sort of newer term that has been coined in the last like 5-6 years, creative placekeeping, which is something that I am a part of, and the artists that I work with and the collectives that I work in engage in this, which is active care and maintenance of a place in a social fabric by people who live and work there. And it's not just about preserving buildings, but keeping the cultural memories of people alive, including keeping and giving agency to the local people who live in those neighborhoods to be able to stay in their own homes. So this came out of a national call that I was on several years ago with other folks as we were starting to talk about what creative place keeping could look like. And then some of my work, a little bit of my work. And so some of you may remember in 2015, there was a protest against the Brooklyn Museum for hosting the Real Estate Summit, which most of you, I'm sure, know Brooklyn Museum does receive quite a bit of public funding. And so we were connecting the issues between not only gentrification within Crown Heights and how the museum with its changes is actually trying to coin itself as this sort of like world-class museum, but also connected to climate crisis. And of course, this was a couple of years after Hurricane Sandy, and thinking about particularly how gentrification and the waterfront and the climate crisis are connected. And out of that came a locally driven piece that we were able to get into the Agitprop show, which wasn't originally there, but through months of fighting, we worked with local communities to create this community bulletin board that became part of the show. It was huge and scaled. I know it's hard to see from here, but the idea was to break down how Brooklyn, for instance, has lost 50% of its people of color, particularly Black Americans, in the areas of Crown Heights and Bed-Stuy and the surrounding areas of where Brooklyn Museum is. And then we actually had a petition there that people could sign, right? And we talked about how police brutality actually was also linked, policing is linked in communities that are being gentrified, and how they're there to police, right? And it's not to protect the people who lived there for many, many years, but the newcomers. And so we connect the zoning and gentrification and policing and all these issues in this piece. So with my work, Displaced in Sunset Park, it's an interactive, there's double interactive here, multimedia project, right? And this, many pieces are actually in the current show at Old Stonehouse. But I wanted to share other images, other iterations that I've shown at Open Source Gallery in the edge of Sunset Park, what now is called, I guess, South Slope. But if you look at the original maps, which do a lot of counter cartography work, right? So, originally Sunset Park starts at 17th Street. But anyway, so people could use augmented reality and use their phones to actually bring to life stories. So they could take a newspaper that I was giving out for free, and actually there are still newspapers currently at the current show at Old Stonehouse, and people could take a walk around Sunset Park and bring these stories to life through their phones. This is an iteration where sort of, again, family is a huge, talking about my own family and how the possibility of my own family being displaced from Sunset Park because of high rents is a huge issue. And so I start with that, and then I go to the research and sort of research through people's stories, as well as just using maps and charting out how zoning history and Robert Moses, people have been talking about, specifically his highway that he built, has really been a really huge piece in racialized gentrification and dispossessing people from people of color from their houses and their apartments and places they've called home for a long time. And a big part of the work is connecting gentrification to activism and how people can take action. So this is a panel of activists and organizers who've been fighting the waterfront gentrification of Industry City, which was just one, of course, for those of you who've been following. I'm sure everyone on this call knows. And this is just some pictures from there. And then an iteration of the work was also part of the Brick Biennial last year. And I just wanted to point out, again, family is a big part of my history. And so a big part of my work and my history, and what really grounds why I do the work that I do. So this window frame that is also, you'll see in a picture from the Stone House, the current show, which pictures every year that we would take in front of our house. And I'm starting to realize that we were taking it because my family was sending it back to people back in Hong Kong and China, right? This idea of like, back then you could actually, right, in the 70s and 80s, actually purchase a home as a working class immigrant family. And actually, you know, they were proud of it, right? And so that was something, not to show off, but it was like, hey, we have this, you know, piece of the American pie, whatever that was and is still. But now, of course, taxes are so high. But anyway, so there were flags also as these organza flags or banners. And just to share with you, again, the research that is a big part of my work. So the redlining maps, the historical redlining maps of 1934, how Sunset Park, how that was sort of, you know, basically, only Bay Ridge was considered the safe part of all of Brooklyn at that time. And of course, safety was defined by having no people of color in it. In the neighborhoods. And so, you know, I know there's a lot of text here, but all that to say that literally what was defined as a dangerous neighborhood was the threat and infiltration of foreign-born Negro or lower grade populations, which they would include, you know, Latino, specifically Mexican and Chinese as well in this description. And so I pulled Ta-Nehisi Coates' words, the research that he did for his the Case for Reparations piece in The Atlantic, which was very influential in my research. And then this is the piece from Brooklyn, from the Stone House in Brooklyn, of course, Old Stone House. And then wanted to rest on this piece, particularly from the show, because this started my journey thinking about utopias, which was really perfect, right? Like when Catherine approached me, which is this idea of how do we, what is the future we imagine? We know what we're fighting against, but what are we fighting for? And started to think about this block that's being transformed literally on our block, all these condos that are going up on the 8th Avenue Chinese part of Sunset Park, and what could we imagine? And so you can't really see it, but on the very far right, you'll see it says housing is a human right in Chinese and in English, and this idea that transformation is possible to a better world we want to envision and fight for. And then I'll put that in the chat, but there's a short documentary that is actually looping on the screen at the exhibit. And then I'll just share really quickly just some images that I took, and basically looking at the internal and external life of how the pandemic and gentrification, and even racism really has impacted my own family and sort of accelerated things. With the pandemic, there's actually they're trying to, you know, pass all these zoning policies, right? So I started working on this in December, the fall of 2019, and into sort of even continuing this project. So part of this was part of an online project with International Center for Photography, but basically this idea of looking at the past and to sort of you know, sort of inform the present and the future. And so I started to look at past photos of my grandfather from the 30s in New York City, and the racial exclusion and the existence of Chinatowns, or the existence of any ethnic enclave or community, right, is due to rampant discrimination that people had to carve out their own sense of belonging. And so looking through that and then looking at the present, you know, at my family kind of in isolation and during the pandemic, but also what it meant to live in a neighborhood that you've been in for 45 years and the changes that were happening. And so the internal and external life. And then you could see this condo behind them kind of has gone up, and there's a few more actually, even during the pandemic. There's another, this black building next to where my parents are, which is our house. You know, it's actually quite high now. It's going up, and my parents, of course, it's like, where will they live? They're not gonna want to give up their home, but you know, the developers are knocking on their door all the time and trying to, you know, buy them out. And so this is sort of a 1965 to 2020 of their relationship. So I look at the internal relationship and how it's strained their relationship, the economic sort of realities of continuing to stay in their home, and then also connecting it to family history, like I said, with the racial exclusion, the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, which we all know was really the first. You know, when Trump was trying to pass his Muslim ban, this is actually an actual policy that was in the books for 50 years that banned Chinese from coming to this country. So I look at that and thinking about Black Lives Matter and thinking about racial discrimination as a whole against people of color in this country. And so this is all done during the pandemic, of course. And I'll just close with some images of another waterfront that I've been working on, organizing with, which is working with groups in the Queens Flushing waterfront property and fighting the gentrification, the luxury hotels that they want to build in the name of cleaning up the water, but yet they want to actually privatize the waterfront in Flushing and not actually make it accessible for regular people. It's just for the people who can afford their $1 million homes that would have access. So this is actually profiling people's stories, and it's at Queens Museum right now as a part of a larger show about home. Chinatown Art Brigade is a collective that I co-founded, which is a group of us working with tenants to amplify stories of gentrification and resilience against gentrification. So these are stories that we were projecting onto walls at night, telling people stories. And that was sort of the perfect image for me, like, wow, that, you know, gentrification is what people call the modern colonialism. And then a show that was supposed to be in March that is going to be in the fall, right after the election, which is very relevant to the theme of this show, Brooklyn Utopias, which is, again, imagining a de-gentrified future. What does that look like? And it's a group show that I'm curating, but I also have some work in the show as well. So I'll close with these links that I also put in the chat if anyone's interested in learning more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Betty, and thank you all artists for doing this. And we actually are going to have time for some questions. This is the only upside of a Zoom meeting. Usually we spill over. This was right on time, so I guess that could be enough. A benefit of a Zoom call, but I'd much rather in person. But these presentations were wonderful, and panelists, if you have questions to each other, maybe we would do that first, and then those who are attending, participants, if you just write your questions in the Q&A, and we will have Ariel, who is taking care of running the show today. She would go through and screen and ask your questions. And Catherine, I would like to, again, turn this over to you to moderate the questions and answers and any statements that you might have about where the presenters who we had today, how their visions fit into your vision of Brooklyn Utopia. And we did choose, for our purposes, as looking at the Brooklyn waterfront, we saw how each of the people came, and the waterfront becoming a very important part of these discussions. Certainly another issue that BWRC will hope to confront later in this year is the whole idea of how the waterfront is going to be affected by sea level rise and introducing questions like managed retreat in some of these Brooklyn neighborhoods. But that's for another day. But today, perhaps, Catherine, you can continue or moderate any questions or observations that the panelists have. And in the meanwhile, we hope that there will be some questions from the audience, and Ariel will moderate those or give them to Catherine, actually. Okay.
Sure. Thank you again for having us, and all these artists did such excellent presentations. So thank you for, sharing your work too. And I'd love to take some questions directed at either me or the artists or Kim about the house. But I will say, sometimes a question I get is, how do you know that this show has been successful, or sort of the impact of these kinds of contemporary art projects? And I think one thing that we really try to do is partner with organizations like the Brooklyn Waterfront Research Center to expand the reach of the show, especially during this time when we can't gather in person as much. Having this big online audience at this event has been really, really great to sort of connect the show to larger efforts going on, with the waterfront and with Brooklyn, and addressing some of these really critical issues like our climate emergency. And sorry for not calling it an emergency before, which it really is. So I think we really try to partner with as many groups as possible. And I think we also really seek out partnerships with artists, like all the presenters today, that they're not just doing like one-off projects for just our show, like little projects. They're really working in a very sustained way with some of these issues, like the plastic industry or gentrification. Betty's been doing so much activism for so many years with her community, and Annalisa is really committed to, long-term to getting this petition done and working with biking groups. So it's really great to sort of be a point on these artists' journeys and try to support them as much as we can through introducing their work to audiences and giving them the opportunity to present in kind of our really unique space and connect to our unique history in that way. We certainly would love to hear your comments in the chat or, over email or on social media about your opinions of the show and what you think the impact is, I guess. But now I'm wondering, does anyone have any specific questions for any of us?
Or do any of the panelists have questions for each other or observations about each other's works? Like, does the work of one artist speak to the work of another artist in certain ways? For instance, Lynn and Robin looked at the Sims facility, the recycling facility in Sunset Park. And is that in any way something, Betty, that you have encountered? And is that some way that the neighborhood is shaped by that or benefited by that? Or so I'm just looking for to provoke some conversation.
Sorry, I'm going to unmute myself. I guess, do any of the artists who are here today, were any of you sort of influenced by any of the other artists in the show or by working in our space in particular?
I'll speak to that from having just met literally the 3 other artists this week. And for sure, and the way that my mind works is that I park everybody's work in my head, and then I try to come back to it to see where we can overlap. So like Betty is your work. I know you're not in Sunset Park now, but your parents are there. And that's right north of Bay Ridge. There's a lot of interchange going on between these 2 neighborhoods. And you're working on the waterfront up in Queens. So I saw the performance by Lynn that was on water, and you're dealing with, if you're dealing with green infrastructure, which is green mobility that I'm trying to do with the bridge, so that there'll be less pollution around us and through the air and through how we live. I could just see it sort of being a thing where now I have everybody's emails, and then I'll be sending you an email like, hey, would you be interested in this? Or can we all have a Zoom talk? But it takes some time to process. We work differently with different topics, but they all overlap in terms of making things a little bit better in the humble ways all can do it. So I'm excited about the introductions to the other artists, and also, frankly, the whole network of partners that the Old Stonehouse has. I think the dredgers are, the Gowanus dredgers are also part of your network up there. So then all of a sudden, it's not just going to be like bike groups, it's going to be canoeing groups that can help the swimmers when they do actions. And so then it's sort of making a hybrid group of people doing good stuff.
I think Lynn Cole has an interesting question in the chat that we probably all think about, and that's how can you bring your work to the next level of attention? I think Robin and I have talked about this a lot, and one of our dreams is to have our work on like billboards, along highways. So it's like, large scale, and seeing Betty's projections, like that's one way to reach larger audiences. But I think because our work intersects with policy and action, getting people, I love this, Annalise's idea of the QR code scan that it'll take you to a petition. And so always, in my work, I'm always trying to figure out how can I get people to take one more step? Because often, a question is like, people feel overwhelmed by the climate crisis. And it's like, what can I do? And then there's also in people working even in environmentalism, like that will say, what you do doesn't really matter because the problem is so big, like one individual can't make a difference. And I hate that argument. It's a fallacy, because even a large scale solution takes somebody doing something. So it's like, you can't do 5 things unless you do the first thing, right? So you got to take one step, and then you can take another, and then you can take another, and then these things compound. So if you feel overwhelmed by 20 things, well, you have to do one, and then that's not overwhelming anymore, and then you can do the next. So yeah, embedded into our projects, I guess, how do you get people to, number one, stop using a plastic bag, like bring your own. And then number 2, call your legislation, and here's the script that you can use, right? So it's these multi-layered things that need to happen kind of in either linearly or simultaneously.
I'm sorry, I just want one thing that I might think is that for this discussion and people are asking questions, this event is being recorded today, and the link to the recording will be on the BWRC website. And then, of course, from there, any of you can lift it and circulate it and the like. So I just wanted to make that known. Okay, sorry.
No, I just wanted to say, you're talking about the recycling center in Sunset Park, and it just made me sort of loop back to my work as an organizer. So I started out doing community organizing for a long time, and I still am quite active in anti-gentrification fights and racial justice organizing. When I say that, to say that is my foundation of sort of having a pulse on where folks are coming from, and really kind of figuring out how do the stories that I bring to life, particularly whether it's through photography or through video portraits or documentary, is we have access to people's stories, and how do we humanize the issue, right, through these stories? In many ways, that's what a lot of us are doing, through whether it's Jane Jacobs as the Shiro for many of us, or the portraits in front of these recycling with recycling materials, literally, and the fashion that you're creating with the plastic bags, but also it's clearly a commentary, a social commentary. But I also, I'm thinking about for my family and people in the Chinatown and Latino community within Sunset Park, for instance, and spend a lot of time with them, obviously. I'm there quite often, even though I live in a different part of Brooklyn now. you know, it's interesting about the thing about plastics, you know, and it'd be interesting to figure out how do you break that wall or penetrate that wall, because I think for a lot of people think the plastics conversation becomes a class issue, right? And so not that obviously poor and working class and people of color care about the plastics and creating pollution with both the cans and the bags, but that's what they have access to, you know, and oftentimes, you know, it's particularly for a lot of the people who are picking cans, that's like their livelihood. So it's like, how do we work toward more sustainable futures for all of us? So there's this way that, you know, and that's something that I'm curious about if you all are with the Beyond Plastics or the plastics campaign even, and banning that, how to really, you know, get access to poor working class communities who get it, but then there's like sort of the practical aspect of it. And I'm speaking specifically to the recycling of cans and things like that is actually supporting people's livelihoods. But I do want to uplift, many of you might know this group called Uprose, which is a part of a larger anti-gentrification group at the waterfront of Sunset Park. They helped defeat the Industry City zoning proposal, and they have put out a green new jobs, green new deal kind of approach to the waterfront, right? Just is like, how do we actually not just create a space for innovation and art, but actually use this as a facility, what it was originally in Sunset Park, which is manufacturing and, you know, all these things, but how do we do it in a green way where creating jobs, real affordable jobs for people in the community, so who live there. So anyway, just thinking through a lot of the sort of the complexities of how do we use art and culture to have these conversations and help move people and help use it to really change hearts and minds, because I think oftentimes for me, I feel like we're speaking to the converted and we're preaching to the choir, which we see what happened in 2016 when that happens. And so I really think about that for myself too, which is language access is a big thing too. So a lot of the work is in Chinese or Spanish and other languages. And I'm very clear about, you know, art can only go so far, right? I think all of us know that, you know, activism and organizing, without that, we can only go so far with our work, our art and cultural work. So it's just more of a comment, observation, things that I'm sort of thinking about too myself.
I think Betty and the others who've spoken are really raising questions about why use art for this type of work, right? Why not just be a gentrification organizer or, you know, a transportation organizer? And I think you're all sort of, I mean, if you want to speak to this more, you can, but I think you're all sort of getting at the idea that art can add that sort of human voice to the issues, and, you know, maybe even catch people's attention in a way that they might not otherwise. Like, it's much more compelling to see somebody dancing dressed up in trashin on a plastic campaign than just, like, you know, some plastic, you know, garbage or whatever. So I think all of these, you know, and then the whole Jane Jacobs piece to humanize that side of the project, I think you're all really touching upon that. I do see some other questions coming up in the chat, and I do like the idea of also, if anyone here wants to speak to the idea of, you know, how you get this message out to some of the, you know, the lower income communities that might have a harder time kind of doing some of these things that we're all recommending because of various barriers. So if, you know, if any of the other artists want to speak to that, I think that would be a great question. I also see a question about what do we find most challenging during this time of kind of remote, you know, everything because of COVID. And I think for me as a curator, the challenge was definitely just like those months where we didn't even know if we could have a show at all in person. And we definitely had to postpone our spring show for sure. And so it's definitely challenging not to have that sort of typical, you know, huge opening night where you've got like 100 people coming at the same time and the crowds and the wine and all of that stuff. But I think it's also like really great that this has sort of challenged us to reach audiences in different ways and have, you know, put together these online components that we haven't done in the past. And I hope that it can be something that we continue to do, because it really does increase accessibility, that people can just go on the website and look at the work. And I think it's we're very lucky in that we have so much outdoor space, and we can do so much public art around our park, and a lot of museums and galleries don't have that advantage. But I don't know, does anyone else want to speak to any of these questions that have come up?
I just want to add that the accessibility point is very important for the Old Stone House, because as a 1930s building, a large portion of our event space is not fully accessible. And so to have the opportunity to really focus on making information more broadly available with what we're able to do now is a great opportunity. And it's been a lift for us because we're such a small organization, but I think it's an exciting part of the programming that we've been able to do through all of this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can speak to that a little bit. My choreographic and dance practice has historically required a lot of physical contact, because we do use a lot of physical partnering, and even in my teaching. So as an example, later this month, I'm leading an environmental justice workshop for artists at research universities conference, and it's based upon physical principles of listening. And I'm trying to figure out, like, how can you, like, my question is now, like, how can we listen to our own sense of touch rather than getting information from someone else? But it's like the whole paradigm has had to shift for me, because physical contact is not a possibility. so like I'm having to reframe all of my work. And teaching trash and workshops on Zoom, where it's like I really rely on people being able to see the physical properties of plastics change as you work with them, and manipulate them in different ways. And so, it's there are certainly challenges, but I'm finding that I have to trust people more than I would have before. Because I relied so much on my own perception of what they were doing, and now I really have to rely on their perception of what they are doing. And so it's pushing me to be an observer in a different way, and really listen to their reflections and of what they're doing, rather than coming to my own interpretations based upon what I see. So it's shifting that, and that's been a really interesting and good learning experience for me. Yeah.
I'll mention two ways in which it actually has been an advantage because of technology. So the story of the QR code is that it was almost phased out because it was too cumbersome for people to use. But then with the technology being now that you can just use your phone camera, then that means that it's having a whole renaissance, which means that I can sit from home and target people and send the code. And again, it all ties in. So there's the technology and there's the people. And you still have to build your communities, which happens through working together and struggling together. And so in this particular case, the QR code came out of my conversations with Kim and Catherine. My initial way was going to be the old-fashioned way with big markers and having people sign and blow up people's signatures and the whole thing. It just was not feasible. And so then technology, it was Catherine's idea with the QR code. And I was like, I made one of those before I could do it. And now I'm obsessed with them and I'm making them and all of this. So that's the first point I want to make, where it's actually an advantage that I can feasibly reach more people, but I still have to build that closed unit close to me. One person at a time. And then the second point I wanted to make is that the pandemic really highlighted the MTA's utter disregard for ever doing anything in terms of the bridge, because when everything was shut down, even then, they did not open a bike lane for people so that there could be transportation that way. And that became a local article that came out right before right as the show opened. And now we're getting ready to go into another phase with the numbers are rising again. And so we'll just keep on seeing how this affects them the second way around. The response was literally in the article that, oh, don't worry, the traffic is back to normal, which is the most insane response. And language again, I can't believe we have to use utopia about green mobility. It's common sense. It's like, hey, you know, this is a, but we really do, because of how conversation and power structures are organized right now. So I'm focused on what I can get out of it, where it will make me more effective, but still one-to-one person as well.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I echo sort of it's a sort of the two sides of the coin, right? So there's like one piece of it, which is the isolation, right? Which is not so nice. And, you know, I think a lot of us work in the community, whatever the community is, a physical community or, you know, sort of, you know, a collection of people that we work with because of common interests. But we've had to, socially distance. So that's been really difficult. And so the project that I had started moved to something very different, which was how do I continue to photograph what was happening in Sunset Park? So my mom actually became the photographer. So she was actually photographing with her cell phone, nothing fancy about photographing what Sunset Park looked like through the pandemic. And now, of course, a lot of businesses are closed. And, now I'm kind of going there and visiting my family. But the very, first couple of months I was very scared to. Actually, my dad has like these sort of ailments, and he's definitely someone who's health compromised. So that was very difficult. But just to say overall that I think that, and maybe others can speak to this with policy pieces, but around the rezoning and zoning issues, we thought for a while, okay, this would be on hold, and maybe because of the economic collapse that's happening all around us, that these all would be on hold. But in June, when things started to open up again, these rezoning hearings went online. And that meant a huge amount of people, again, immigrant and low income people who might not have the data on their phone or have a computer or even have internet access, were not able to participate in the public hearings online. And that's not just with housing and zoning, it's with everything on the city, with the city. So even with the gentrification with Sunset Park and Queens and all the other pieces, even the Chinatown, there's the 4 jails that they're trying to build throughout the city, and one of the jails is in Chinatown. All these hearings were happening online, but they were not language accessible, so they were not in the languages where people, whether it was Chinese or Spanish, and languages that people spoke in the community, but also time of day, right? It was in the middle of the day, right? If it's online, you would think they can actually make it more accessible, right? And have them in the evenings. But I have to say that the Sunset Park hearing that was a couple of weeks ago against Industry City, it was a 12-hour hearing. And that would not have been possible if it was all in person. People were just staying online, doing whatever they were doing at work, staying online. And then when their name was called, they testified. And some people even testified wearing masks, socially distance, protesting in front of Industry City. So they were testifying with their phones in front of Industry City as they were pointing to Industry City at the waterfront. So I just thought that was genius. 12-hour hearing, I think one of the longest recorded, and because it's online. And then a week later it was defeated, and they pulled out because they saw so many elected officials and residents and activists saying, no, we want something that's sustainable, green, and not this corporate plan. So just that there's some benefits to it.
No, that's really cool. I'm seeing another question here about sort of how we, I guess, deal with like competing visions of utopia, like that. What's a utopia for one group could be a dystopia for a different person. And I don't know how you guys as artists have sort of dealt with the idea. I know some of the artists in the show were actually like uncomfortable with the word utopia and sort of had to really think about what does that mean to them. Like I know Alan, who did the portraits, was like, you know, how can we possibly make Brooklyn a utopia that would be for everyone? And then she sort of used the term to kind of come back to, you know, what does utopia mean to me? And to me, it means, you know, these support structures and caring for one another. And that sort of inspired the series of portraits, which was also something that she could do easily during a pandemic, because she just had to, you know, email her friends, get photos from them, paint them, post them on Instagram. So I guess that's sort of how one artist grappled with the idea of utopia, and that it's sort of impossible to achieve. But I guess, have any of you in your work sort of come across like maybe opposition to the type of utopia that you're trying to promote, or skepticism? I know that artists, you know, like Nathan and Nate were sort of grappling with the idea that some people thought that, you know, the Wegmans supermarket was a good thing for low-income communities, you know, giving them more food access or jobs. But at the same time, you know, there's a lot being lost there too in terms of nature and history. So I think you definitely have those sort of competing visions. Obviously with gentrification, you have the competing vision of, you know, maybe neighborhoods are getting more attractive or safer, but at the same time, the people that have worked really hard to make them that way are now getting priced out. So I guess, what do you guys think, how this issue has come into play in your projects? Does anyone have thoughts on that?
I mean, I guess, you know, there's a lot of perspectives, right, around any of the issues that we're all talking about. One thing I often reference, and a question that I always ask myself in terms of single-use plastic and just waste in general, is like, we have this system set up that is about convenience. At what point, my question I always come back to is like, at what point is our waste, like, is it not so convenient? Like, all single-use plastics is all about convenience, right? At what point does it not become convenient? Because there's so much of it. And I think about Park Slope, Brownstone, you know, the more steps you had when the neighborhood was built, the more steps you had going up was a sign of wealth, because you were removing yourself from the trash of the street, right? So that was when people had chamber pots and would throw their stuff out the window and their scraps. So the more elevated you were, it's like, are we gonna get to that point? I mean, you know, if you noticed street litter, and that's kind of how I came into plastics pollution work, what is like, it has exponentially grown in the last 10 years. So at what point is like, can we, I mean, we can't contain it anymore. So at what point is your convenience becoming a health hazard for someone else, right? And we can look at that in terms of Annalise's work and Robert Moses' planning. It was about convenience, but it's not convenient for the people who have asthma. You know, so there are all these kind of competing interests that can be on a small scale or a large scale.
Okay. I'm sorry.
No, I know Annalise wanted to say something, right? And I had a comment about the Utopias piece too, but
okay.
I think you were trying to talk, yeah.
Well, just briefly, because I think I sort of discussed my attitude to utopia. I have to live within the reality that we have, and I can look at it both ways. And of course, that there is, you're talking about taking out a lane for cars, there's going to be opposition to that. But on the other hand, there's also so many people who would bike if the option was there. And another thing I want to mention that has come out of this is two people from the Sunrise Movement that has contacted me for this, and they're coming all at it in terms of doing protest riots, equity. How are you looking at the histories of the other side of the bridge in terms of the neighborhoods that were destroyed, in terms of Black neighborhoods that were destroyed? And it's a very, it's very, very interesting, because there's also people who want to sue the MTA, and I think it would be brilliant to team up the young people are really the ones that are at the bad end of this, because they have statistically more years to live than somebody my age. And so to have a young youth-led activist movement bring about this lawsuit, I think would just be brilliant. So of course people are going to be upset, but a lot more people would actually also be pleased, because we're facing a huge financial upheaval with people losing their jobs. They're going to be losing their cars too. So then you can buy a used bike and you can still get around, which is an option that you're not going to be able to do that if there are no bike lanes that are safe in terms of transportation. So you can't be friends with everybody, but hopefully what you're trying to do is something that really just makes sense. So that's my attitude to Utopia. I think that it's fine to dream and then to really act on implementing it.
And I know we're almost out of time, but I just quickly wanted to say that the show's theme is a perfect example of how, I think, as Lynn and Annalise were saying, coming from very different perspectives, but the work overlaps and they're so intertwined, the issues that we all care about. And particularly when we talk about utopias, for me, it's just a framework to be able to talk with communities and even ask myself, what is it that we're fighting for? We all know what we're against again. I mean, you think about the destruction that Robert Moses has caused really just throughout the city and Long Island and all over the place, really. But, you know, for instance, in Queens, we all know about the World's Fair, right? When he just sort of tore up communities to build this whole behemoth of a thing for the World's Fair, and divided up neighborhoods, right? And the reason why the waterfront is the way it is was he created that dump, you know, that is now just kind of a sewage that they're going to clean up just for the wealthy. So we always know, and then even with the developers. And so even through my collective Chinatown Art Brigade, you know, workshops that we did with residents of Chinatown and tenants, it's like, oh, what are we actually fighting for? What's the utopian, the flip side of the dystopia that we're seeing, or what's the flip side of it? And, you know, we've done like journaling, or I walk them through a mapping drawing exercise where groups of 5 or 6 people with poster board, they start to map out what the current state of the situation is, the ideal utopia, and then how to get there. And it's actually a tool borrowed from the art and activism, the Center of Creative Art and Activism. And those tools were really valuable. Like, so in other words, through art and culture, we were able to unleash people's imaginations of what a utopia could look like, and unleash their imagination of what it is that we want to work toward together. And we started to really realize, like, oh, we want, you know, more community centers, art centers, libraries, public green spaces, all these things that people had a hard time when you just say, okay, what is it, the ideal utopia you want in Chinatown or Sunset Park? But then, you know, using that as a framework and then having people work together using art and culture was a really beautiful way to approach that and to chart that out. And I think this show is another way, another tool for us to, in our communities, at least when we're just dealing with the everyday grind, right, of surviving, that we get to just unleash our imagination. So I really think it's a really great tool for us, a framework.
Thank you. And I
Thank you. Catherine.
Yeah, I'll just say as a final word, I know we're out of time. I think a lot of the questions I'm seeing in discussions are really pointing out a topic that I think we could have a whole other discussion on, which is like, how do we make these kind of utopian visions and practices, you know, best practices that we're all talking about, you know, with reducing our plastic waste, for example, or, you know, biking more or whatever, you know, how do we make those things accessible to all, not just people who have the time and money to kind of make these lifestyle changes? And how do we present these kinds of problems as something that affects everyone and not just those of us who have the time and resources to even think about it, you know? So I think that's definitely a topic for a different discussion, and hopefully some of the projects in the show do touch upon that and really make everyone kind of empathize with all of the different people being affected by what's going on right now. But I just want to thank everyone again for having us today. This has been such a great discussion, and I hope there will be future opportunities as well.
Well, thank you very much, Catherine, for your vision of Brooklyn Utopias. And thank you, everyone, Lynn and Robin and Betty and Annalise for participating in this. And to all of our audience, thank you very much for attending our breakfast talk. And until the next time, we will, I assume we have you on our lists. And again, remember that the recording for this will be on the BWRC website. I'm not exactly sure where, but someplace in there are breakfast talks, our list of breakfast talks, and under the list of this one, or under the feature for this one, you will see that link. So thank you everyone very much, and be on the lookout for more BWRC events. Take care.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It was wonderful.
Okay,
Thank you.
for coming.
Bye-bye.
Bye.